in the US, it's $9 million per breach. But when you dig down into it, it gets much worse.
Just one admin. And clients really want them to be like universal soldier, who can do everything, which is not possible, obviously.
What people don't realize is the biggest threat to your organization is not people from the outside world, it's your own internal users.
What are C-suite leaders' biggest misconceptions about Salesforce data security?
Well, I've got bad news. You will get hacked someday. And I think that's the thing that people need to understand is you will get hacked. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Welcome to Pro Salesforce, the podcast where we share valuable insights and strategies to empower businesses using or planning to adopt Salesforce. I'm your host, Sergii, a Salesforce Consultant here at Synebo. Before we get started, if you're also passionate about all things Salesforce and want to stay ahead in this ever-evolving ecosystem, be sure to subscribe to Pro Salesforce on your favorite podcast platform, and don't forget to hit the like button. Today, we are diving into the critical challenge of aligning C-suite priorities with technical teams to strengthen Salesforce security. We'll explore key strategies for designing secure APIs, managing data risk, and leveraging tools like Agentforce. My guest today is Matt Meyers, certified technical architect, author, and expert in Salesforce data security. Hi, Matt.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, great. Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
I'm so glad to have you here today. And before I will start to bother you with my questions, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So about my background. So I've been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for the past 18 years. I started out as a developer and got hired for this thing called Salesforce I'd never heard of. And they said, go to developer.force.com. You got 30 days. And I was like, I'm going to get fired. But then I ended up, digging into it, drank the Kool-Aid, and then just worked my way up, and then eventually started made my way into working at Salesforce. And then after a while, I wanted to expand my horizons a bit, so I decided to start my own company, which right now I am the CEO of EzProtect.
Can you tell us a little bit about EzProtect?
Sure. EzProtect is a virus scanning platform for Salesforce because most people don't understand that Salesforce doesn't scan files uploaded for viruses or other threats. And most people don't understand that files uploaded to Salesforce can contain viruses potentially, and Salesforce doesn't scan for viruses. And so what EzProtect does is stops those viruses in their tracks and protects the company's data from being breached from viruses.
And can you tell us a little bit about your journey into Salesforce security specifically?
Sure. So one thing I forgot to mention is I'm a Salesforce CTA, and that was part of that journey as well. But I really didn't ever see myself really getting into Salesforce security itself. But the nature that we started a security company kind of fell into that, and it was just more of little by little, just starting to understand the importance of security, because I think when I first started the company, like most people do, is more about starting a business, trying to find something that will make money, but then realized later as we started on our journey, started seeing there was a bigger and bigger problem. I think that the biggest part where really revelation for me was when I was also doing consulting at the time in the early days of starting the company. And I was working for a client of mine, and we found out that client had been hacked in their digital experience, and more than 5,000 records with private information had been exposed from the case object. And this was really a fact because the Salesforce had been misconfigured. It wasn't really that Salesforce itself had a vulnerability. A lot of people don't really think about is really that bigger depth to Salesforce. And most projects I've been on, people think about security last instead of security first. And I think that's kind of where I started starting to see the issue that was a bigger deal. And what really got me into security is I started presenting at Salesforce conferences. Every conference I go to, I use it as a research initiative, and I start asking different questions. And I started seeing a theme in general across all of them. Most people were overly confident about the security of their data in Salesforce. Most of them thought, because of the trusted messaging Salesforce puts out, where Salesforce is a trusted platform, but the minute it becomes insecure is the minute you start configuring it, if you're not configuring it correctly. And I think that was the tone that I found. So I really started becoming very passionate about educating people and showing them what they need to be aware of in Salesforce, not just from the virus perspective, but just pretty much from the general security side perspective in Salesforce.
So basically, Salesforce is secured, but it depends on how you set it up. Yep.
That is correct. Exactly. I mean, like I said, that Salesforce is an extremely secure platform, but the minute it becomes insecure, as a friend of mine said, is the minute you start configuring it, provided that you're not configuring it correctly, which I've pretty much found there has been no org that I've found so far that didn't have some kind of security gap when I've reviewed them.
And what keeps you passionate about working in this specific area?
I think what really keeps me passionate, as I said, is just that thing that I'm helping people. Is that initially I just, as I went out, was for just trying to start a company, just trying to see what I, find something that worked. But then literally when I started going out and I saw that, this customer had gotten hacked, and then I, went out and I just started talking to people and I realized that it was a very little understood area with security, as you thought that that's very important. So that's what really became really passionate about it. And that's what drives me, is helping to ensure that our customers and just anyone in the ecosystem's data is being secured properly in Salesforce.
Thanks. And let's start with some basics. Can you tell us what key features does Salesforce provide out of the box?
Key feature. That's a pretty loaded question, I think. And I'm assuming that this is for people that probably don't know Salesforce too much. So Salesforce is a customer management system allowing you to manage your customers and your customer data in Salesforce. And it could be from a sales perspective, support perspective, marketing, and a ton of other things that they do today.
Based on your expertise, where do you see the biggest gaps businesses need to address? Uh, for example, I'm sure you faced it a lot when Salesforce admins neglected like strict profile permissions, for example. Um, can you tell us, like from your expertise, what are the biggest gaps?
I think there's quite a few. I think the first gap that I would call out is most companies are not thinking about security first when they should. Most projects, when you start out, they're thinking about the business requirements and not the security requirements. So actually, I find this reporting and security are the first things that you should be thinking about, but typically I find on a lot of projects the last thing people think about. And that's what leads to more of the gaps in the designs as well in the security. But the biggest things that I'm seeing most of the time are overuse of permissions. So people because it's quick and easy, they'll give view all data on an object or modify all data on an object. They'll select every field. Same thing goes with APIs. They'll send every field across because it's easier instead of taking the time digging down. So I've seen there's a lot of other stuff, but that's kind of, I think, the most common thing. And also, I would say just the over too many profiles, too many permission sets, people not separating your permissioning out in a more organized way, which makes it hard for an admin to really understand what permissions they're giving their end users.
Yes, I agree with you. And even from my perspective, from my expertise, I had a client who asked every time they had a new manager in the team, they asked to assign system admin profile
Yeah, that's another.
because it's easier.
Yeah, and that's another metric that I've solved with a partner of ours. I think you might know them, Elements, and they did a study of their data in their from their customers, not their direct customer, but their customers. What they do is they help people to give a microscope into their org, and they did an analysis of the customers that are using their product, and they found that on average, there are more than 20 users in any org that have full admin rights and that are not an admin profile, that have view all data, basically. And they got rid of everything that had admin in the name, any kind of that looked like it could be an admin profile. And still, after all that, still more than 20 on average had view all data in the org or modify all data, which is pretty scary.
Yeah. And I bet another common issue is role hierarchy. 'Cause, a lot of people don't understand why they need a strict role hierarchy and that it's different from your company's hierarchy.
Yes, that's very true. I think they try to model the hierarchy after, like you said, the company's hierarchy, and then they don't really model it off of the security hierarchy. But that goes back to understanding those the security requirements of your organization to that level that you need. Also, there's problems, of course, when you have people that need to roll up to multiple hierarchies. So that's sharing across teams and things like that, and they still want that roll up, and then they start doing weird things without really thinking about how to solve those.
And maybe another common thing is the sharing settings, the org-wide defaults.
Hmm.
It's also a
Yep.
common issue when it's by default enabled as public read write or read only, and then they're surprised why everyone in the company can see everything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people, I mean, I think that's where you should start, where most mature teams start, but some people don't realize that, they don't think about it, or it's easier, where typically it's a best practice to first make everything private, then open it up with a broad sharing rule or criteria-based sharing. And then if you need to lock it down more, you can always change that versus it takes a lot of time, especially with sharing rule calculation, to start, going the other way around, having everything public read right, and then changing it to private. So it's just, and also I think it just makes you think about it too. When you make it private, you think about, okay, what else could I be adding? How else could I be exposing my data versus everything's public read only? You don't really even think about that.
Yeah, and this is mostly from the Salesforce admin perspective. Yeah, those daily challenges. But what are C-suite leaders' biggest misconceptions about Salesforce data security? I mean, from the C level, 'cause, they make decisions and they simply cannot understand sometimes why do they need to invest a lot of time into the analysis, into
Hmm.
all. I bet it takes a lot of time to review all the permission sets, profiles, and rebuild it. So how can we bridge this gap between C level
Sure.
and the implementation?
Sure. Personally, I don't think the C level are getting down to that level of looking at field level permissions and things like that. But seriously, the I've been doing a talk this year in multiple different shows about this exact topic, and specifically was about that. See, there's a big gap between the C level and the in the project level. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it is, of course, the C level is too busy. They just don't want to know about it, because if they know, then they're liable for some of that stuff. Others, it's just they feel like Salesforce is trusted because of the messaging that they hear. So they don't really think about it or worry about it in their other systems. Other things is, like, from a security perspective, even at the C level, they're thinking about the wrong things. They're treating it like any other system, where Salesforce is not. It's a completely different type of animal. And then from the project level, they have similar kind of problems. Like, the project level, they're afraid to tell the C level if they have a security issue, if that's going to create more scope, because people are punished for not meeting their deadlines, and or if they go over budget. But in reality, I mean, if you have a security breach, you're going to go over your budget anyway. If you get the breach, you're going to go way over your budget. All your timeline is going to be shot out, because everything's going to have to stop to address the security issue. So I think that the C level should kind of make it a lot more approachable, so that project teams can go up to them and talk to them if there are security gaps, and they shouldn't be punished for finding a security gap. They should be rewarded instead.
From my experience, I had several cases when C-level management tried to do this micromanagement, and even through the like field level security, which is it's not what C-level should do.
No, no. I
And
mean, C level should be at the top level, helping to manage the direction of the project. They shouldn't be micromanaging the project itself. So that's definitely not good. But also at the same time, they should be giving those right directions of communication, make people feel that they're part of the process, and approachable, and helping them to solve problems, instead of making people afraid to come to them with problems.
yeah, and you already mentioned, but let's talk about it in more details. What risks do companies face when they overlooking security? So you mentioned the budgets. What
Hmm.
else?
Um, I think that's again that's a pretty broad topic, like what risks company face. I think first let's start with the financial risks. So many companies don't understand the true financial risks of having a breach. I think they generally know, but not at a deeper level. And especially, I run into this a lot of times where it's interesting to me. So, and when you're procuring a product in companies, every company treats the procurement the same, whether it's a security product you're buying, whether it's or let's say a business product. And the problem is with that is the reason you're buying a security product is because you're insecure. And could be inherent costs that are more of delay that cost you more than if you're just buying a different type of product. So one of the biggest metrics, as IPM puts this report out every year about the state, I think it's a security report, and but so the last time they put it out, they put a metric out that said that in Europe, it's I think it's 4 million euros basically per breach, and in the U.S. it's $9 million per breach. And but the thing is, people think, okay, that's not bad. It's 4 million, 9 million. We're a $1 billion company. But when you dig down into it, it gets much worse. What people don't think about are the long-term effects of a breach. So, for example, how much would it, if you lost your customers, what it would cost? There's a metric out there that says 30% of people say they will leave a company if they had a breach. And then of those, I think it's another 10 to 15% actually leave. So if just think about this, if you're a $1 billion company or a $10 billion company, how much would it cost you if 5% of your customers left? We're probably talking, hundreds of millions of dollars in there. Then also think about, well, how much does it cost you if, to regain those customers? Well, that because marketing is expensive, of course, and the cost to acquire a customer is not, is much more than keeping an existing customer. Now that you've got that, what does it cost for downtime? Imagine if Amazon went down, the airlines went down. I think the airlines have some crazy metric, like I think it's millions per hour when they're down. And typically there's a metric that when they're down, you're down for at least, I think on average, it's a week when there's like a ransomware attack. And even recently we've seen in the news in the US here, we've had, there was a technical issue and the entire day in the airline, they were down. So how much does that cost? Also, even if you get new customers, you still have to fix your reputation. So how much does it fix to do a campaign to fix your reputation? Then you have legal fees. You have GDPR. GDPR can take as much as 20% of your revenue. So now we're not talking about 4 million euros or $9 million. We're talking about 100 million, hundreds of millions of dollars in the end that a single breach could end up costing you. So I think that's where companies really need to think about, that from a financial risk, of when that's how you should approach it of anything. Actually, I think you should look at that risk. I mean, I think in Salesforce in general, there's still, a number of risks that out there, but I think, look at that financial risk first, and then you can then understand what are your actual risks in Salesforce. Once you understand what are the bad stuff that can happen if you don't do what you're supposed to do.
Are there any methodologies you would recommend to to effectively calculate the risks, or it's just like pretty straightforward?
Well, I think from a financial risk out there, well, you have to do a lot of research to find out what there's a lot of metrics. They're always changing. It depends on your industry and all that. And so what I done in the past took about 6 months of doing research across various industries to see what are all the costs involved in a cybersecurity breach. And then in addition to that, to come up with, so you understand what are your overall costs of a breach based on all this data by industry. So, because I was always curious, wanted to really know, is it true what people say? Are these big breaches you see on the news, or this just an outlier? So I ended up creating this calculator, tool that people can use, that's available on our website that allow you to actually see what's the true cost of a breach.
Stepping aside from an executive perspective, what roles are critical at the start for building a more secure Salesforce environment? Like, let's say, what is the optimal team?
Hmm. Well, I would start, of course, back to a methodology. instead, or a framework before I go to the team. Whether you're large or small, you really should have a framework that's guiding you, and then from there, you know what kind of team you need based on the type of work that you need to do. And I'm a big fan of Salesforce's well-architected framework, which is modeled after AWS's well-architected. That it's giving you lots of really good best practices and things that you should do, shouldn't do, patterns, anti-patterns, even architect, design frameworks, decision guides, all sorts of stuff like that that can help you frame your framework internally on how you're approaching your projects. And then from there, you can understand the type of team that you would want to build. Again, it's going to go back to what are you trying to protect? What's the thing you're trying to do? Then you can understand the people. But of course, structuring from a small business to a large business are much, much different in nature, of course, because large companies have a lot more resources, small companies don't. But small companies also, I find, don't pay as much attention to the security risks as large companies because they're not as big of a target, or they think they're not as big as a target. But there's an interesting metric out there also: 60% of small businesses will go out of business within 6 months of having a single breach. That's because they're less insulated to a breach. But from a security team, I would say I think large enterprises definitely have a lot more personnel. They have their project manager, they have their developers, they have their architects. You have your QA people, you have your even security comes in, security people department. With a small business, it could be typically it could be you may not even have a project manager depending on the size. You may just have a couple developers who are working. I would say even companies that are of even 100-person company sometimes have that challenges. I remember in my early days of my career, I was working for a 150-person company, and our entire Salesforce practice or department was 3 people. And then we would do these projects, but there would be no project manager. I was the project manager, I was the architect, I was the developer, I was the QA. And it's just the nature of how that works. And sometimes like I said, these companies probably have some of the money for that, but they just don't allocate the budget to their teams to develop it. I mean, really the larger companies, like when you're getting to the ones with the thousands of employees, that's when they're really having much more structured teams. But the smaller should really think about some of those core things. Like you should at least, even if you don't have them full time, I suggest that every company bring in an architect. Yeah, even if let's say some people say, oh, we can't afford an architect because they're very expensive. Yes, but how much is it going to save you in the long run? I saw one company I was working with in the past, they brought me in because they had a team of developers working things, and then they realized that it was designed all wrong. They backed themselves into a corner. So they had to start from scratch. Versus it'd be much cheaper. They would have just brought in an architect, even if it was just for a review in the very beginning, and then they would have been on the right path instead of having to start the project over from scratch.
And from my expertise, I also faced tens of projects where small projects, like up to 100 users, where was only one dedicated Salesforce admin. That's it. No project managers, no developers, nothing. Just one admin. And clients really want them to be like universal soldier, who can do everything, which is not possible, obviously.
Yep, exactly. I found that's really, I mean, it is very dangerous. Like you have, what does it say? You know enough just to be dangerous is the saying, I think. So you have especially when it comes to developers, because developers are always code first. Admins, of course, are always config first. And so you have either one side or the other. You don't have that balance where an architect's really going to look at it and say, okay, what's the best thing for this situation versus what you're comfortable with. And I think that's kind of where I've seen so many times where architects are just forgotten about, and they don't think the value's there. Oh, I don't want to spend the money for them, But as you said, like we said, in the end, it's going to cost you more money by not having the right people. Even if you can't afford them full time, bring them in just in the beginning, and then you can roll them off later.
Yes, that's a really good advice. And even here at Synebo, we always suggest to our clients, like if they think that they cannot afford architect for full time, we just suggest them like to take architect just, for example, for one review, for high level analysis, or we can suggest to involve a consultant to extend the team even partially, even for a small amount of time, but it will reduce a lot of risks in future.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like I can actually give you an example just to us as well as we had a project and we had a limited budget. We had a full team running. We had project manager, we had architects, we had developers. But then we realized with the project that we were running out of budget for to complete it in time with this external consulting company. And so what we did is probably what most companies what you do is okay, well let's get rid of the architects because the developers are actually doing the real work. What we ended up doing was we got rid of the developers. And instead, we used the architects to build us the blueprints that we need in order so that we have and know what we should be building with our own internal developers. So even though the project might take a little bit longer to complete because we have less developers, but instead now we know how to build it. I love house analogies. So imagine if you had an architect that was designing how to build your house but then you realize you can't afford the architect anymore. So then you just let the architect go and you say, okay, electrician, plumber, framer, you guys go and just build the house. I don't think I'd want to step foot into that house. Or even better, what if it was a bridge that you drive on with your kids and your family? Would you trust that if just the people that putting it together build it and the architect wasn't involved? So I mean, I think you should treat your Salesforce is your house. It is your bridge. So you should treat it the same way as you would as something physical in the real world.
Based on your statement, could you explain how each role contributes to Salesforce security in the organization, where their responsibility, overlap or diverge?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I mean, my personal opinion is every role contributes to security. It's not just one person's responsibility. Security is everyone's responsibility from the top down and the bottom up. Yeah, I mean, even if you think about physical security, all the way down to the janitor who comes in every day. If you're going into a building and you're swiping your card, it's their responsibility to call people out that shouldn't be there. Same thing in a Salesforce project. Even the admin, who I personally think is the glue of everything, they should be looking at the developers as they're developing their code. Should be thinking about the business analysts as they're analyzing the data, the testers, even the end users as you're using the product. You should, if you see any kind of issues, you should call those out. So really, I don't think it's one person that should be responsible for the security. It should be the entire team and should be collectively responsible for the security of the organization and the project.
Yes, that's a really good example. If janitor will not close the door in the evening, the office can be robbed. So
Yeah.
Salesforce admin can assign field level security on on the salary field, and the whole company will see this information.
Yep. Or just same thing. Like I said, like the janitor is, they enter the building, they see someone follow them in, which no company allows that. And same thing with if you're an end user, you're an admin, and then you're using your system and you see something suspicious. If you don't say something, you're just as bad as the person who's doing doing the bad thing.
Let's move to the technical side of things. What are the key principles for designing secure APIs, and how can teams avoid common vulnerabilities?
Sure. This is another talk I've been doing this year at various shows, is thinking about securing APIs. And really, there's, of course, with APIs, there's two things that you should be thinking about at the top level. It's the inbound and the outbound for APIs, and both of them have different considerations. That for the inbound APIs, the main thing that people should be thinking about is with your connected apps. Connected apps in Salesforce, what they do is they allow people to authenticate or authorize really into the Salesforce using someone else's credentials. So imagine, think of it like when you have a mobile app or you go to Facebook or whatever, and it says, "Hey, do you want to play this game?" And it asks you to be able to use your information to access that game, or you're the mobile app. Are you okay to, this app is going to be using your information. What that really means is that app is going to be logging into the system using the API as you. So the scary thing about connected apps until recently, you couldn't stop an end user from using or installing a connected app into Salesforce. Like as an end user, I just go to, and then I can just click on a button that says, okay, I want to use this app. It looks neat. Looks like something I can use, and says, do you want to let it use your information? Yes. It's just using my credentials and my permissions. But as we talked earlier, many people aren't doing the best they can to protect the data of even regular end users. And I bet you, if you look into your org, you could many of your end users will probably have all these apps installed that were never even authorized by the organization. And what if one of those apps was malicious, or even just as bad? What if one of those companies wasn't treating security at their company very well? They got hacked, and now your users get hacked. I mean, even your admin users, you should think about. Like most admins have dozens of apps, if not more, installed because they just don't think about it, don't worry about that. You should really be cleaning up those connected apps. And another way you could be doing is you're making sure you're restricting users by turning off API access if they don't need it, because that would stop the apps. Ensuring you have using IP-based security, because then those systems wouldn't be able to get to your users if you're using that security. On the other hand, from the outbound side, the other thing you should be thinking about is sending your credentials. So there's a thing called name credentials or external credentials now in Salesforce, where it allows you to to basically, instead of setting hard coding a username and password in an API call, if you're using this external credential, which is encrypted, and it sends that credential in the call automatically to do the authentication process, securing so you're not using username and password when authenticating. Also, in general, you shouldn't really be using username and password. You should try to use some kind of like SAML or OAuth flow where you can get a token that's used to authenticate instead of using the username and password to authenticate. Other things you should be doing is think about what you're sending out. Never be sending out sessions, the session informations, because someone could use that to come back in. Don't just send out every single field. It's easier, but then that puts you at risk. Instead, be very deliberate in what fields and what data you're sending out of your API, because that's your data, that's your goal of your organization. You don't want to share that out unless it's absolutely necessary. And then also, same thing for your integration users. That's again on inbound. Make sure you're locking down the permissions of those inbound integrations, even if it's not on even if it's a controlled integration. Then you still need to make sure that user doesn't have more access than they need to. Don't share your integration users. Have one integration user per application. That way you know what they're doing, especially if you can't do that, at least per vendor. Because I've seen a lot of times where someone has the same integration user across all vendors, which basically means every vendor has sysadmin access. Well, how much do you trust your vendors? How much do you trust your vendors won't get hacked? I think that's the other thing. So I think there's one thing I tell people also is there's all these things that we've talked about security here, but and people saying, okay, what can I do to make sure I don't get hacked? What can I do so I make sure we're never going to get hacked? Well, I've got bad news. You will get hacked someday. And I think that's the thing that people need to understand is you will get hacked. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But what you can do is ensure that the damage is minimized. So over the past summer, I was going to a lot of castles. And if you look at castles, they've got lots of walls. There's a reason for that. They want to contain the breach. So if you have one wall comes in, you have another wall, then you're going to have a small breach. And maybe you can stop the breach there. Or even if they pass that wall, they hit another wall. And so the whole idea is that of data security, it's not protecting your organization so that you won't be breached. It's protecting your organization so the breach is contained, and then you can address the breach as fast as possible, and you can minimize the damage and recover quickly.
Thanks. I think we can use this as a security handbook, best practices.
Yeah, I've got
We'll
a
look
lot of
up this
stuff in
part.
my head.
Yes, and actually, I faced a lot when companies use just one user for all the integrations, and it's not even this special user, like specific. It's somebody's user admin, and it's also used for all the integrations.
Yep, exactly. You just have like this one profile for every integration, which causes a
Yes,
lot of
yes. Another thing that usually a lot of companies underestimate the security thing, and they think that they can be just hacked by some specialist, some hacker. But a lot of times they simply expose the data, and you don't even need to be a hacker. You know, some through the guest user to you on your Experience Cloud or something else. There are a lot of gaps.
Yep, exactly. I think that's a really good point because what people don't realize is the biggest threat to your organization is not people from the outside world; it's your own internal users. It's not because they're going to be malicious. Some can be if they, are not happy with the company, but generally it's because your internal users have more access than you're giving external users or someone that's trying to break into your organization. And it's really where the risk is it's because the person that is not being careful, the salesperson who didn't take their security awareness training that got phished. And then it's so really, that's again about the containment. Don't be giving your users more access than they need because someday one of those users is going to get hacked. And the damage is going to be based on how much access that user that got hacked has.
Yeah. And finishing with the APIs, can you share some real life example where the API implementation was like a major challenge?
Really, I think that's a hard one. I don't think APIs are that complicated when you really think about it, and so I think that's why I'm struggling to answer this question because I think it's just because people think they're challenging is when they're not really thinking about that security. Because I think API should be thought about the same way as the normal user should be thought about. What are they trying to access? What are they trying to do? And then securing it in that way. There's a little bit of nuances to an API since it's not a real person, it's a system, as we said, like making sure you're doing your authentication correctly. I think the biggest thing that people probably struggle with the APIs are the connected apps because there's so many features and settings on those connected apps that allow the inbound authentication into Salesforce. So I think there's ways that, that's where they could run into some security issues if you don't configure those correctly and think about this correctly. But outside of that, I think it's just really thinking about, again, just like treat them as a normal user. What do they need to do? And, and how long do they need to stay connected? Where are they connecting from? And then secure it just like you would any other user. Because, I mean, I think the thing is, you wouldn't share logins with one of your internal users. So why should you share logins with your API users?
Yeah, exactly. Really good point. Now let's move on to more trendy topic, I would say, and for some reason it's even more exciting than security. The Agentforce.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Agentforce has been gaining like traction as a solution for the Salesforce ecosystem. And what are some considerations, maybe architects or consultants should keep in mind when adopting new tools like this to
Mhm.
ensure, they align with the organization security and data management priorities?
Sure. I think the first recommendation I would have just for any new technology is don't just dive in immediately and just turn it on. I mean, I think if you were at a pool and you can't see the bottom of the pool and you can't see what's in the bottom, and you can't see anything, the water's dark, are you just going to jump in? Probably not. I think the same thing is with these new tools. You don't really know much about them, especially thinking about from a security perspective. You don't know what they're doing. I typically will always, well, not typically, but I always first wait a little bit just for the tool to get a little bit more mature first. Let some other people take the beatings first, and then after the tool is a little bit more mature, then I'll start testing it out, looking at it in our test environments. But specifically, you should treat any tool just like it's anything else in the project. Just because it's shiny and new doesn't mean you need it. You don't need that expensive new car. You can, if you don't need to buy, a BMW if a Honda is going to be fine for you, right? Same thing. And you don't need the shiny new thing just because it's there. You don't need to buy the new TV if your current TV already works, right? So I think that's the first thing to consider. People are excited. Salesforce does all this hype. You want to jump in and try the new thing, but take it slow. Understand it because I think I've seen a lot of people already, whether it was Agentforce, Data Cloud, other things, jump in and then all of a sudden they realize they configured it all wrong and either they just caused a lot of tech debt and they had to re-implement it or it even caused security issues. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing I would say with any new technology is first understand why you need it. What are the requirements? Take your time to implement it, and then you will be more successful. And specifically speaking to Agentforce, there's another talk I'm going to be doing at TDX this year about the security of Agentforce. And what people don't realize is Agentforce is running as an actual user. There's a user license assigned to Agentforce because it's supposed to, the way they're talking it up is it's like it's a person. It's supposed to be replacing your agents in your call center or whatever to answer those questions. So it needs to have a user and they need to have permissions. And those permissions are going to be the same as any other user. Would you give one of your internal users full sysadmin? So, I mean, agents are typically running as sysadmin, but it doesn't mean they need to be. They should be running with just the access that they need to do the job that they're doing. It's just like a person, an agent could make mistakes. So if your code, let's say agents, they have these things called topics, and then you can assign to those things like Apex classes or flows. So if you had an Apex class, let's say, that's without sharing, they can return all contacts from it, and the agent can execute that. Well, what's to stop the agent from sending it back all the contacts? Yes, you have the trust layer there and some other things, but it's not perfect. It's just like a person. If a person had access to every contact in the organization and he called in, what's to stop them from giving out a contact they shouldn't? What's to stop an agent from giving out a contact they shouldn't? I mean, I think there's certain things you should consider. So don't give them more access than you need to. Don't just throw an Apex class out there and thinking the agent will protect it and they're not going to send back information they shouldn't. I mean, think about that in that same way we talked about. Don't give that agent access to more data than they need. Make sure that there's guardrails in place so the agent is only giving the data that they should back to their end users.
So basically, we're coming back to the very beginning where we need to follow like the best practices when building these profiles, given accesses, and whatever. So it's not even related to the Agentforce.
Correct.
Follow the best
Exactly.
practices, and you'll be secured.
Exactly. I think that the key here of this entire talk is really, like you said, going back to the beginning. Don't just jump into things. Just don't start configuring things. Make sure you have a plan. Make sure you understand why you need to build that thing, what you need to build. Make sure you have the right team in place. Make sure you're using an architect to help, at the very least, just to validate the solution looks good to someone that knows what they're doing to call out those roadblocks. Don't just start jumping in and building stuff because that's where you're going to run into trouble, whether it's from, again, like a tech debt, a user experience, or a worst case, a security issue that you may introduce into your organization.
Yeah, this is what I always tell to my clients when they come up with some new request, for example, with Agentforce or some new features they see in Salesforce demos or Trailhead. I always ask them, do you have any issues? Like this tool was designed to solve some issue, to remove some pain points. Do you have any issues? Or
Yep, exactly, and this I think this is really relevant to my book that I wrote. I've been on a book tour all year long. It's called "Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences," and I think I may have mentioned before. It's about a customer of mine in my consulting world who got hacked in a misconfigured Salesforce environment. And basically, what ended up happening was they had a sharing rule that they had not configured properly, and for the guest user, it basically allowed people access from the guest user into Salesforce. And this ethical hacker and some unethical ones as well were able to retrieve thousands of records of data that had private information in them, all because of the sharing rule that wasn't misconfigured. There was also the misconception that just because it wasn't on the UI, someone couldn't access it. Where Salesforce everything powered by Lightning in Salesforce. So if you're using the Lightning experience, there are APIs that are public facing, that are client facing in your browser to render Lightning. So like all your page layouts, the fields on your page layouts, the Apex classes, all of that uses Lightning. These Lightning APIs let people do anything that a standard REST API will do. You can insert records, you can update records, you can delete records, you can execute Apex, you can execute flows. So if on the API side, your guest user or your community users have not been properly configured and they have more access than they need, someone could be getting to that data. And from a files perspective, it's even worse because if you expose files, the ability for a guest user to upload files, well, anyone can use the API to upload those files into your Salesforce environment publicly, and then authenticate the users. You can't even stop files from being uploaded. to those environments. So it's not Salesforce. This is not something that where Salesforce had a security breach. It's just the way web works these days. Everything is front end. And so the whole thought is, yeah, the APIs are there, but if there's no data to access and you can't do anything with them, then they're useless. So it's like that's why you need to. It's very important. You need to make sure that your permissions are configured correctly. Otherwise, someone could use one of these APIs to get access to your data or destroy your data or manipulate your data, causing issues within your organization.
Yeah, and we talked a lot that so briefly we need to follow the best practices, and from the very beginning we need to build like strict permissions, sharing rules, profiles, wherever. But what steps should businesses take post implementation to maintain ongoing security monitoring and address potential risks?
Sure, this is an excellent question because a lot of people they think about security when they implement the project. They don't think about it after the fact. The thing about security and just in general, I would say everything for your entire project is you should be always thinking about anything about security all the time. You should be thinking about if I make this change, what happens here. Also, just because you don't do anything doesn't mean something else happened. Maybe Salesforce introduced a new feature and not Salesforce's fault, but maybe just the way you were doing it before, maybe open some things up, or maybe they shut things down, like in the guest user perspective, causing usability issues. So I don't think it's just a security thing, but most important, you should be thinking about security all the time. You should have a process in place, a change management process in place to make sure changes that go into your environments are properly tested, properly architected. You shouldn't just start throwing things in after the project's done. You should really keep the same practice you were doing during the project after the project on an ongoing basis, having those checks and balances, ensuring that people are reviewing, ensuring you know why those changes are going to your environment, testing your systems, testing your environments, making sure everything it acts as you intended that it should act.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I even have one example. I had a client when I started to work with them. They had couple hundred users, around 200 users, and there was a mess. We fully rebuilt the role hierarchy, the sharing rules, basically like everything. We created dedicated user per each integration, and they grows until the 1,000 user, and it gave them a chance like to grow because before they struggled like daily issues with even with the records visibility. Even you need to think about the future because it's really common. 9 out of 10 projects I see at the very first year of the Salesforce, they skipped all the best practices, and then they come to us after 2 or 3 vendors, 2 or 3 consulting companies with a lot of issues, and we need to deal with all of them. So what would it be if there is like just one thing to our listeners that they should take away from today's conversation?
I think the biggest thing, if you're going to take away anything, is your data in your org is your gold. You need to protect your gold, and you should always be thinking about security within your organization. Thinking about how, what are you doing that can further that thing? What are you doing that can ensure that the data of your org is being protected, your secrets are being protected? Are you doing enough? I will probably say no because I don't think anybody's doing enough. But at the same time, don't take that perception of I'm going to stop a breach because you won't. Take that mindset of what can I do to reduce or contain the breach when it happens? What can I do to ensure that I'm not just leaving the front door open, but if anybody pushes hard enough, you can break the front door down. But do you have other doors inside your house? Are all the other doors in your house locked? So it's going to make it harder for them to get to in each of the rooms once they're in your house. Do you have other ways to kick someone out of the house once they've entered your house? I think those are the things that you really should be thinking about when it comes to security. Always think with a security mindset. Everyone is a security operative within your organization.
So I just want to sum it up. So it's basically it's a mindset. Yep. So
Correct.
you need to think about security at every level. Let's sum up our conversation. So let's start with the bridging gap between C-level and the technical teams. So the C-level should not be involved into the micromanagement, and the technical team should be focused on the security issues. You should treat each API as a separate user, and you should think about it like about the user. What this user should do, should see, read, edit, create, and all the permissions. And regarding the Agentforce and tools like Agentforce, don't dive into the pool if it's if there is dark. If you see the darkness, you should check it on the trailhead. You should read all the articles. You should test it yourself on the sandbox before you use it, and you should think. You should not follow the trends. First of all, you should solve the issues. And I think this is it.
Very good summary.
Um, Thank you very much for participating. It was very interesting conversation. It's very valuable and insightful. And thanks to our listeners for tuning into today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to ensure you won't miss any future insights.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
See you in the next episode.